June 23, 1944. Mid-Atlantic Ocean, roughly 870 nautical miles west of the Cape Verde Islands. Commander Uno Kameo stood in the cramped control room of I-52, a massive Japanese cargo submarine carrying 2 tons of gold, 120 tons of tin, and other valuable war materials destined for German-occupied France. Through his periscope, he observed the German U-530 slip silently into the darkness after transferring radar equipment and 2 technicians. The rendezvous had gone smoothly. Soon his submarine would surface for the night run toward Europe, moving at 15 knots beneath starless skies. Everything seemed flawless. Within 3 hours, Commander Kameo and his 94 crewmen would be dead victims of a technology they had never encountered. The sounds of their submarine being torn apart would be captured on wire spools by American aircraft circling above, listening through devices floating on the ocean's surface. These sonar buoys, dropped from an Avenger torpedo bomber, transmitted the final convulsions of I-52 to operators miles overhead, marking not only the destruction of a single submarine but the psychological collapse of Japanese naval confidence. The ocean, once Japan's vital maritime highway, had become an American surveillance grid where nothing could remain hidden. The mathematics of this technological imbalance were already being inscribed across the Pacific in statistics that would shatter every assumption Japanese submariners held about their capabilities, their missions, and their odds of survival. Between 1941 and 1945, American submarines would sink 1,314 Japanese vessels, totaling 5.3 million tons, representing 56% of all Japanese merchant losses. Japanese submarines, despite their technical sophistication and size, sank only 184 Allied ships, totaling 1 million tons. The disparity was not merely numerical, it reflected a fundamental divergence in how 2 nations approached undersea warfare, industrial output, and technological advancement. While Japan built some of the world's largest submarines, capable of carrying aircraft and circumnavigating the globe, America produced sonar systems that could detect them from miles away. While Japanese engineers constructed impressive vessels, American factories churned out sonar buoys, FM sonar, acoustic torpedoes, and radar systems faster than Japan could devise countermeasures. The transformation did not come from a single dramatic moment but through countless encounters in which Japanese submariners gradually realized they were being hunted by unseen forces, tracked by technologies they could not comprehend, and methodically destroyed by an industrial machine of staggering scale. Lieutenant Commander Nukio Nambu, commanding officer of I-401, one of Japan's massive submarine aircraft carriers, later told American interrogators after his surrender in August 1945 that the instant he understood Japan had lost the war came not from battle but from overhearing American radio traffic during a patrol. The casual efficiency, the abundance of resources mentioned in routine communications, the sheer scope of coordinated operations across thousands of miles of ocean all revealed capabilities Japan could not match. For thousands of Japanese submariners, however, the reality arrived through direct, terrifying encounters with American anti-submarine technology, experiences that left survivors shocked and demoralized. The story of how Japanese submarine crews comprehended American technological superiority is not one of heroic last stands or dramatic battles. It is a story of cumulative revelation, of gradual comprehension, of technological shock so profound it transformed confident warriors into men who knew their cause was hopeless long before their nation officially surrendered. The Japanese submarine fleet that entered World War II in December 1941 was among the finest in the world. Japan possessed roughly 70 ocean-going submarines, many of revolutionary design. The I-400 class, the largest in the world until nuclear-powered vessels appeared in the 1960s, measured 400 feet long and displaced 5,900 tons submerged. They could carry 3 M6A1 Siren floatplane bombers in watertight hangars, launch them via catapult, and theoretically strike targets as distant as New York City or the Panama Canal. Each I-400 class submarine carried enough fuel to circumnavigate the globe 1.5 times without refueling. Traveling 37,500 nautical miles at 14 knots, the engineering was extraordinary. These submarines featured special trim systems for submerged loitering, demagnetization cables to protect against magnetic mines, air search radar, and anechoic coatings to absorb sonar pulses. Smaller Japanese submarines were equally remarkable. Type C cargo submarines like I-52 could traverse 21,000 nautical miles, transporting vital strategic materials between Japan and its allies. Fast attack submarines prowled the Pacific armed with long-range torpedoes and formidable underwater capabilities. Japanese submariners trained extensively, practiced stealth operations, and understood their vessels intimately. Many had years of experience. Commander Tatsunosuke Ariazumi, who would lead submarine operations later in the war, was regarded as one of Japan's finest underwater tacticians. His crews were disciplined, skilled, and self-assured. They had reason for confidence. In the early months of the war, Japanese submarines participated successfully in the Pearl Harbor operation, reconnoitered American positions, supported fleet operations, and hunted Allied warships. The doctrine emphasized fleet support, protecting Japanese naval assets, conducting reconnaissance, and attacking high V-value military targets. Unlike American submarines that would focus on commerce raiding, Japanese submarines were reserved primarily for tactical operations against enemy warships. This strategic decision would prove catastrophic. While Japanese submarines hunted American aircraft carriers, American submarines were systematically destroying the merchant fleet that kept Japan's war economy alive. More importantly, this tactical focus meant Japanese submariners encountered American anti-submarine warfare systems, primarily in the most dangerous contexts when American naval forces were most alert and most heavily protected. The first encounters with Sonobo occurred in 1944 after American industry had perfected the technology. Sonar Buoys were deceptively simple devices, small, battery-powered sonar units that could be dropped from aircraft and would float on the ocean surface, listening for submarine sounds and transmitting them via radio to the aircraft above. Developed by the British in 1944 under the codename High, they were quickly adopted and improved by American forces. The impact was revolutionary. Previously, an aircraft hunting a submarine had to maintain visual contact or rely on radar, which only worked when the submarine was surfaced. Once a submarine dived, it was effectively invisible to aircraft. Sonar Buoys changed everything. An aircraft could drop a pattern of 5 sono color-coded purple, orange, blue, red, and yellow, creating an underwater listening grid. The aircraft would monitor each buoy in turn, listening for sounds emitted by submarine propellers, machinery, or movement. The technology was so effective that it became standard equipment on anti-submarine aircraft throughout 1944 and 1945. For Commander Uno Kameo and the crew of I-52, the first indication something was wrong came at 11:40 p.m. on June 23, 1944. Lieutenant Commander Jesse D. Taylor's Avenger torpedo bomber launched from the escort carrier USS Bogue detected I-52 on radar while she ran on the surface. Taylor dropped flares that illuminated the massive submarine, then attacked with depth bombs as I-52 crash-dived. The first attack nearly missed, explosions bracketing the submarine as she descended. What happened next revolutionized anti-submarine warfare. Taylor dropped a purple sonar buoy into the water. Within moments, his radio operator heard the distinctive sound of submarine propellers transmitted from the floating device. Taylor could track I-52 underwater, following her evasive maneuvers, predicting her movements, positioning his aircraft for the killing blow. He dropped a Mark 24 mine, codename Foe, an acoustic homing torpedo that locked onto I-52's propeller noise and followed it relentlessly until it struck. The Sonar Buoys recorded everything: the explosion, the sounds of the hull breaking apart. Commander Taylor's crew heard what they described as crackling and crunching noises like a tin can being crushed. I-52 sank to the ocean floor, 17,000 feet below, taking Commander Kameo, 94 crewmen, 14 passengers, and 2 German technicians to their deaths. The Sonar Buoy recordings survived in the National Archives. Thin wire spools marked Gordon Wire No. 1 and Gordon Wire number 2, preserving the last moments of a submarine whose crew never knew what technology had killed them. The sinking of I-52 demonstrated capabilities that terrified Japanese submariners when details filtered through intelligence networks. American aircraft could track submarines underwater. The implications were staggering. Every time a Japanese submarine dived to escape aircraft, it wasn't escaping at all. It was simply hiding from visual observation while remaining perfectly visible to acoustic sensors. American hunter-killer groups, centered around escort carriers like USS Bogue, combined radar Sonar Buoys and acoustic torpedoes into integrated systems that transformed submarine hunting from chance encounter into systematic elimination. USS Bogue's task force alone sank 13 German and Japanese submarines between February 1943 and July 1945. Using these methods repeatedly, Japanese submariners began reporting strange experiences. Aircraft would appear over diving positions with impossible accuracy. Depth charges would fall in precise patterns despite the submarine being hundreds of feet deep. Torpedoes would follow evasive maneuvers as if guided by invisible hands. They were being hunted by technologies their own navy hadn't deployed, couldn't counter, and barely understood. The psychological impact deepened with Operation Barney in June 1945 when 9 American submarines equipped with FM sonar penetrated the Sea of Japan through heavily mined straits that Japanese planners had considered impregnable. The Sea of Japan was supposed to be Japan's safe haven, protected by 4 lines of underwater mines in Tsushima Strait. Japanese merchant shipping moved freely there, believing submarines couldn't navigate the minefields. FM sonar, developed specifically to detect underwater obstacles, emitted a distinctive chime whenever mines were detected, a sound American submariners dubbed Hell's Bells. The technology allowed submarines to map entire minefield patterns, identify safe passages, and navigate through barriers Japanese engineers thought would stop any underwater approach. On June 4, 1945, the first 3 submarines, Sea Dog, Creel, and Spadefish, entered Tsushima Strait submerged, their FM sonar painting pictures of the minefield on electronic screens. The Hell's Bells chimed constantly as they were between mines spaced sometimes only 50 yards apart. After 20 hours underwater, all 3 submarines emerged safely into the Sea of Japan. 2 more groups followed. And within days, 9 American submarines were operating freely in waters Japan had considered absolutely secure. The hunting was spectacular. Between June 9 and June 24, 1945, the 9 submarines sank 28 Japanese ships totaling 54,786 tons, including a submarine and a destroyer. They operated with impunity, surfacing at night to charge batteries, submerging during day to attack shipping that believed itself safe from undersea threat. Japanese Naval Command was stunned. Intelligence reports began flowing in, describing submarine attacks inside the Sea of Japan. Survivors reported American submarines operating freely, attacking at will, escaping without difficulty. The psychological blow was immense. If American submarines could penetrate the most heavily defended waters, if they possessed technology that could navigate through minefields that had taken years to lay, then nowhere was safe. The ocean itself had become enemy territory. Japanese submarine commanders operating in these waters understood the implications. Immediately, they were being hunted by forces possessing technological capabilities Japan couldn't match. Every patrol became an exercise in survival rather than combat effectiveness. The technological gap extended far beyond sonar. American submarines possessed radar sets that could detect surface contacts at ranges exceeding 20 miles in good conditions. Japanese submarines didn't receive radar until June 1944, and even then only in limited quantities. with performance inferior to American systems. This meant American submarines could detect Japanese vessels long before they were detected in return, could track targets from beyond visual range, could position themselves for attacks with information advantages Japanese commanders couldn't counter. American submarines also benefited from ultra-intelligence, the code-breaking operation that decrypted Japanese naval communications. American forces knew Japanese submarine schedules, patrol areas, supply routes, and operational plans, often before Japanese submarines received their orders. Combined with radar and sonar superiority, this meant Japanese submarines were operating in an ocean where the enemy knew where they were going, and what technology could track them getting there. Lieutenant Commander Nukio Nambu, commanding I-401, later described the feeling to American interrogators as being constantly watched, constantly tracked, never safe, even when submerged in empty ocean. The paranoia wasn't unjustified. It was accurate assessment of reality. The industrial disparity manifested in ways that shocked Japanese submariners who survived to see American facilities after surrender. While Japan struggled to maintain 70 operational submarines throughout the war, America built 314 submarines between 1941 and 1945, replacing losses faster than combat could inflict them. American shipyards were producing submarines at rates Japanese planners considered impossible. Mayer Island Naval Shipyard in California, Electric Boat Company in Connecticut, Port South Naval Shipyard in New Hampshire, and other facilities operated around the clock, launching fleet submarines at intervals Japanese yards couldn't approach. The submarines themselves represented industrial capabilities beyond Japanese comprehension. American Gato and Balao-class submarines, while smaller than Japanese giants, were produced with standardized components manufactured across dozens of factories. Engines, batteries, torpedoes, periscopes, sonar systems, all flowed from separate facilities and arrived at assembly yards in perfectly coordinated streams. A single Gato-class submarine required approximately 140,000 parts manufactured by contractors in 32 states. The supply chain never faltered. When submarines needed repairs, spare parts were available immediately. When submarines were lost, replacements arrived within months. Japanese submarines damaged in combat often waited weeks or months for repairs due to parts shortages, maintenance facility overload, and industrial bottlenecks that American forces never experienced. The torpedo situation exemplified the technological and industrial gap. American submarines began the war with the defective Mark 14 torpedo, a weapon plagued by depth control problems, magnetic exploder failures, and contact detonator issues. For nearly 2 years, American submariners fought with weapons that frequently failed to explode or ran at incorrect depths, passing uselessly beneath targets. This might have been Japan's opportunity to exploit American weakness. Instead, American submariners themselves identified the problems, conducted their own testing, and implemented fixes, despite resistance from the Bureau of Ordnance. By September 1943, the Mark 114's defects were corrected. Simultaneously, the electric Mark 18 torpedo entered service, leaving no wake and thus giving targets no warning of incoming attack. The Mark 24 mine, actually an acoustic homing torpedo code named Fido, could be dropped from aircraft and would autonomously track submarine propeller sounds until impact. Japanese forces never developed equivalent weapons. Japanese torpedoes were generally reliable but offered no technological advantages. More critically, Japanese industry couldn't produce them in quantities approaching American output. American submarines carried 24 torpedoes on patrol. They fired them freely, knowing resupply was guaranteed. Japanese submarines carried fewer torpedoes and were constrained to fire them conservatively due to limited availability. The cumulative effect of these technological and industrial advantages created a mathematical inevitability that Japanese submariners gradually understood. Every patrol, every encounter, every narrow escape from American anti-submarine forces reinforced the same lesson. The ocean belonged to America. Now, American submarines sank an average of one Japanese ship per day throughout 1944, the peak year of their campaign. In that single year, 492 Japanese merchant vessels totaling 2,387,780 tons were destroyed by submarine attacks. Japanese submarine construction couldn't replace the vessels being lost. Japanese merchant marine capacity, which stood at approximately 6 million tons in 1941, had fallen to 2 million tons by August 1945, with only 320,000 tons in condition to carry cargo. The destruction of Japanese shipping wasn't just a military problem. It represented the systematic strangulation of Japan's war economy. Rice from Southeast Asia couldn't reach Japanese cities. Oil from the Dutch East Indies couldn't reach Japanese refineries. Rubber, tin, tungsten, all the materials Japan needed to continue fighting were trapped in overseas territories while American submarines patrolled the sea lanes. By 1945, American submarines were experiencing difficulty finding targets large enough to justify torpedo expenditure. The Japanese merchant marine had been virtually eliminated. What few ships remained hugged coastlines, used narrow channels where submarine operations were dangerous, or simply stayed in port, unwilling to risk the journey. Japanese cabinet ministers would later tell the Diet that the greatest cause of defeat was the loss of shipping, acknowledging that American submarines accomplished more toward victory than any other single weapon system. 4. Japanese submariners who survived the war and witnessed American operations firsthand after surrender. The technological revelations were devastating. Captain Arizumi, developer of the I-400 submarine program and one of Japan's most experienced submarine officers, committed suicide aboard I-401 rather than face surrender. He understood what many Japanese naval officers were beginning to accept. Japan had challenged an industrial power whose technological capabilities exceeded anything Japanese planners had anticipated. When I-401 and I-40, the massive submarine aircraft carriers, surrendered in August 1945, American sailors who boarded them were astounded by their size. These submarines were longer than American destroyers, displaced more tonnage than anything in the American submarine fleet, and possessed capabilities that seemed futuristic. Yet, they had accomplished nothing operationally. Neither submarine fired a shot in anger. The planned attack on Ulithi Atoll was cancelled when hostilities ended. The planned strike on the Panama Canal never occurred. These magnificent vessels, representing thousands of hours of engineering work and scarce industrial resources, contributed nothing to Japan's war effort precisely because American technological superiority made their missions impossible. They couldn't reach their targets undetected. They couldn't operate safely in American-controlled waters. They couldn't survive the hunter-killer groups, the Sonar Buoys, the radar, the acoustic torpedoes, the systematic anti-submarine warfare systems that American forces had perfected. American examination of captured Japanese submarines revealed both impressive engineering and critical weaknesses. The hulls were not as strong as German or American designs, limiting safe diving depth. The submarines were easy to detect on sonar. Their large size and construction creating acoustic signatures that American sonar operators could identify from miles away. They lacked radar until very late in the war. They had no equivalent to American FM sonar for mine detection. Their anti-aircraft defenses were inadequate against American aircraft that hunted them with increasing effectiveness. Most critically, Japanese submarines lacked the integrated fire control systems that made American submarines so deadly. American submarines used target data computer systems that automatically calculated firing solutions, accounting for target course, speed, range, and torpedo characteristics. Japanese submarines relied on manual calculations that took longer, were more error-prone, and put submarines at greater risk during attack approaches. The technological gap wasn't subtle. It was profound and pervasive, affecting every aspect of submarine operations. The human cost of this technological inferiority was staggering. Japan lost 130 submarines during the war, representing approximately twice the percentage loss rate of American submarines. Of the 70 submarines Japan possessed in December 1941, plus those built during the war, most were destroyed by American anti-submarine forces using the very technologies Japanese submariners had come to fear: sonar, radar, aerial attack, depth charges, and systematic hunter-killer operations. Approximately 10,000 Japanese submariners died during the war, a casualty rate exceeding 70%. Submarine service, initially considered prestigious and honorable, became recognized as a death sentence by war's end. Young men assigned to submarine duty understood they likely wouldn't survive. Families mourned sons departing for submarine training, knowing the statistical odds. The Japanese submarine force, which had entered the war with confidence and pride, ended the war as a broken arm of a defeated navy, its survivors demoralized and its capabilities nullified by technological inferiority. The psychological transformation of Japanese submariners mirrored the experience of German PSWs in America, but followed a different path. Where German prisoners witnessed American abundance and prosperity directly, Japanese submariners experienced American technological superiority through lethal encounters at sea. Both groups reached the same conclusion through different evidence. Japan and Germany had challenged nations whose industrial and technological capabilities exceeded anything Axis powers could match. For Japanese submariners who surrendered in August 1945, the evidence of American superiority was overwhelming and undeniable. They were brought aboard American submarines and shown technology they had never seen. They toured American naval facilities and witnessed production capabilities that explained why American forces never seemed to run short of anything. They saw the Sonar Buoys that had hunted their comrades. They examined the FM sonar that had allowed American submarines to penetrate minefields. They studied the radar systems that gave American submarines eyes beyond visual range. They handled the acoustic torpedoes that had destroyed so many Japanese submarines. Lieutenant Commander Nambu, taken aboard USS Sagundu after surrendering I at 401, was given a tour of the American submarine by Lieutenant Commander Stephen L. Johnson. Nambu examined Sagundo's radar, her sonar systems, her fire control computer, her torpedo loading mechanisms. Everything was more advanced than equivalent Japanese systems. More importantly, everything worked reliably. Equipment didn't break down. Systems functioned as designed. American submariners operated their boat with casual confidence that came from knowing their technology was superior, and their support was guaranteed. Johnson's crew had survived 9 war patrols, sunk Japanese vessels, evaded enemy anti-submarine forces, and expected to survive the war. Japanese submariners had no equivalent confidence. They operated knowing American technology could find them, track them, kill them. The psychological burden was immense. Nambu later told interrogators that the moment he understood Japan had lost wasn't when he heard of Hiroshima or Nagasaki, but months earlier when he monitored American radio traffic and heard the casual efficiency with which American forces coordinated operations across thousands of miles of ocean. The sheer scale of American operations, the Abundance of resources mentioned in routine communications, the technological sophistication implied in everyday procedures, all pointed to capabilities Japan simply couldn't match. The evidence continued to accumulate during the months after surrender. Japanese submariners were brought to American bases in Japan, to Kasibo, where captured submarines were studied, to Tokyo Bay, where surrender ceremonies occurred with American submarines prominently displayed. Vice Admiral Charles A. Lockwood, commander of Submarine Force Pacific, made a point of having his flag hoisted aboard the 400 and I-41 during the surrender ceremony on September 2, 1945, aboard USS Missouri. The symbolism was clear. American submarines had defeated Japanese submarines through technological and industrial superiority. When I-400 and I-41 were taken to Hawaii for detailed examination by American naval engineers, Japanese crew members accompanied them as technical advisors. They watched American engineers disassemble their boats methodically, photographing every component, measuring every dimension, documenting every system. The Americans were thorough, professional, and impressed by some aspects of Japanese engineering. But they were not intimidated. American engineers had seen these submarines and understood them. They had defeated them. Not through superior seamanship, but through superior technology deployed with overwhelming industrial capacity. The final revelation came when I-400, I-4001, and other captured Japanese submarines were taken to sea off Hawaii and deliberately sunk as target ships in mid-1946. The decision was driven partly by Soviet demands to examine the submarines. American forces refused to let Soviet engineers study Japanese submarine technology, so they destroyed it. But the symbolism resonated with Japanese submariners who learned of the decision. Their finest submarines, vessels that represented Japan's technological apex, vessels that could carry aircraft across the Pacific and strike American cities, were destroyed casually by forces that no longer needed them for study. American submarine technology had advanced beyond anything Japanese boats could teach. The vessels that had once represented Japanese naval power were reduced to target practice, their destruction barely noted in American records. For Japanese submariners, the message was clear. Japan had built impressive submarines, but America had built technology that made them obsolete. The ocean had never truly been Japan's. It had simply taken time for American technological and industrial superiority to manifest fully. The lessons learned by Japanese submariners spread through post-war Japan as survivors returned home and shared their experiences. Many wrote memoirs describing their shock at American technological capabilities. Others gave lectures to Japanese self-defense force personnel about the importance of technological parity in modern warfare. The submarine veterans associations that formed in the 1950s and 1960s focused heavily on understanding what had gone wrong, why Japan's submarine force had achieved so little despite impressive engineering. The conclusions were unanimous. Technological inferiority, industrial weakness, and strategic misuse had doomed Japanese submarines from the start. No amount of courage, skill, or determination could overcome the fundamental asymmetry in capabilities. American submarines operated with technological advantages at every level: detection, fire control, communication, navigation, and logistics. Japanese submarines, regardless of how well designed or skillfully operated, were fighting from positions of permanent disadvantage. The submariners who learned this lesson carried it into Japan's post-war reconstruction, influencing industrial policy, technological development, and military planning for decades. The economic miracle that transformed Japan in the 1950s and 1960s was partly informed by lessons learned during the war. Japanese industry focused on technological excellence, quality, control, and competitive advantage rather than size or grandeur. The I-400 submarines had been impressive but ineffective. Post-war Japan built smaller, more reliable, more technologically advanced products. The emphasis shifted from creating impressive individual achievements to building integrated systems that worked reliably. Sony, Toyota, Honda, and other Japanese companies that became global leaders learned from military failures during the war. They understood that technological superiority required not just good ideas, but complete systems, reliable production, quality assurance, and continuous improvement. Former Japanese naval officers, including submarine veterans, took positions in these companies and influenced their development. The lessons of American technological superiority during the war shaped post-war Japanese industrial philosophy. The transformation was complete when Japan Maritime Self-Defense Force submarines began incorporating American technology in the 1960s and 1970s. Japanese submariners trained with American instructors, learned American tactics, used American sonar systems, and operated boats designed with American assistance. The former enemies became allies, united by recognition that technological excellence and industrial capacity determined outcomes in modern warfare. For Japanese submariners who had experienced the war, this transformation vindicated their post-war assessment. Japan needed to match American technological capabilities, not just admire them from a position of inferiority. By the 1980s, Japan's submarines were among the world's finest, incorporating lessons learned through painful defeat. The circle was complete. The submariners, who had been hunted by American sonar, now built submarines using equivalent technology, having learned through defeat what victory had taught their former enemies. The recordings of I-52's destruction, preserved on wire spools in American archives, remain as testimony to technological revolution in warfare. Modern analysis of those recordings by Johns Hopkins University Applied Physics Laboratory confirmed that acoustic homing torpedoes guided by sounds transmitted through Sonar Buoys destroyed I-52 conclusively. The technology that killed Commander Como and his crew in June 1944 represented capabilities Japan never matched throughout the war. Those same capabilities, refined and improved, became standard in modern navies worldwide. Sonar, radar, acoustic torpedoes all evolved from technologies that shocked Japanese submariners in 1944 and 1945. The story of Japanese submarine crews realizing the ocean was no longer theirs, as ultimately a story about technological change in warfare. Superior technology deployed with industrial capacity trumped courage, skill, and determination. Japanese submariners were not cowards. They were not incompetent. They were operating with inadequate technology against forces possessing decisive advantages. The psychological journey from confidence to recognition of defeat paralleled the experience of German PS. In America, though the context differed, both groups encountered American capabilities they couldn't explain, couldn't counter, and eventually couldn't deny. Both groups returned to their homelands carrying lessons about technological and industrial competition that shaped post-war development. Both groups influenced Reconstruction by emphasizing the importance of matching American capabilities rather than simply admiring or resenting them. The ocean that Japanese submariners once prowled with confidence became an American domain through technology and industry. Sonar Buoys floating on the surface transmitted sounds from below. Radar swept the horizon beyond visual range. Acoustic torpedoes hunted submarines autonomously. Hunter-killer groups coordinated aircraft and surface vessels into integrated systems that eliminated submarines systematically. The transformation was complete by mid-1945, leaving Japanese submarines with nowhere to hide, no safe harbor, no hope of survival. When the 9 American Submarines of Operation Barney emerged from the Sea of Japan through Lapuru Strait in late June 1945. Having sunk 28 Japanese ships in supposedly impregnable waters, the psychological defeat of Japanese naval forces was complete. If American submarines could penetrate the most heavily defended waters using technology to navigate through minefields, then Japanese naval supremacy was finished. The ocean belonged to those who controlled the technology. Japanese submariners understood this lesson viscerally. They had been hunted, tracked, and killed by technologies they couldn't see and couldn't counter. Those who survived carried the knowledge that Japan's defeat was inevitable once American industrial and technological superiority manifested fully. The ocean was never truly Japan's. It had only taken time for reality to assert itself. American sonar buoys, radar systems, acoustic torpedoes, and industrial capacity had transformed submarine warfare. Japanese submariners, regardless of their skill or courage, were operating in an environment where the enemy possessed decisive technological advantages. The realization unfolded gradually through repeated encounters, narrow escapes, and reports from fellow submarines. By 1945, it was universally acknowledged among survivors, the ocean was no longer theirs. It belonged to the nation that had developed the technology to dominate it. America had won the undersea war not through better seamanship, but through superior science, engineering, and industrial capacity. The legacy persists in modern naval operations. Sonar remains central to submarine tactics. Acoustic torpedoes are standard armaments. Sonar buoys, vastly improved from 1944 models, now patrol oceans worldwide from aircraft and ships. The technological revolution that stunned Japanese submariners in 1944 continues to evolve, with modern submarines employing capabilities that would astonish both American and Japanese forces of World War II. Yet the core lesson remains unchanged: technological superiority, supported by industrial might, determines outcomes in modern warfare. Japanese submariners learned this lesson through defeat and carried it into post-war reconstruction. They influenced Japan's industrial development and military planning for generations. The submarines that once symbolized Japanese naval power now rest as museum exhibits or lie on ocean floors, testaments to engineering skill made obsolete by superior technology. The crews who operated them absorbed lessons that shaped nations, demonstrating the critical role of technological competition in determining which states thrive and which falter. The story of Japanese submarine crews intercepting American sonar buoys and realizing the ocean was no longer theirs stands as a testament to the transformative power of technology in warfare. From confidence to recognition of defeat, from presumed superiority to acknowledgement of inferiority, the experience reshaped not just individuals but entire nations. The ocean changed hands, not through surface engagements, but via invisible technologies floating on the waves, listening beneath them, and transmitting data to forces that hunted with scientific precision. Commander Uno Kameo and the thousands of Japanese submariners who perished during the war were overcome by an industrial and technological system they could not comprehend until it was too late. Those who survived carried knowledge that shaped post-war Japan and influenced global naval development for decades. Ultimately, the ocean belonged to those who controlled the technology to master it, a lesson painfully learned by Japanese submariners between 1941 and 1945 that remains relevant in modern naval warfare and technological competition.